This is defects of character. It's a being in the self. Selfishness. Page 62 explains it. Selfishness, self-centeredness. This is the cause of our problems. But the other thing says the problems of our own making on page 62 in the next paragraph. That's why I say my problem is Bob. It is. It just is. Because when I'm out of Bob, like this guy at the meeting said, when I'm happy and joyous, then everything comes to me quickly. So anyway, as we go on here, we're on step 5. So here we go. Look, step 4 is called the therapy. It's called the therapy step, right? But step 5 is interesting because I don't know about you, but when I went to therapy, I went there for years and trying to figure it out. And I'm not saying, I want to say anything good or bad about that, but all I know is that it didn't work for me. I stopped because figuring out with a crazy mind, I couldn't figure it out anymore. I was a crazy one. So how can a crazy person figure out a crazy person? This thinking was off. But I had to forget as it says, the set-aside prayer, you probably heard. I had to set aside everything I knew about in life. So anyway, it goes on to say, but on step 5, after the 4th step, it says about casting it out. You know what? Actually, on page 75, it talks about, and this says it all about the 5th step. So here we went through, we saw what was wrong with us. We talked about giving it up in 1, 2, and 3. But here on page 75, it talks about we pocket our pride. This is on the 2nd paragraph down. So we talked about the defects of character. So here it's saying pocketing your pride, one of the 7 deadly sins, right? That had to do with the selfishness, self-centeredness. Illuminating every twist of character. So we look at the twist of character. It says illuminating, but it doesn't say doing and analyzing it. We look at the past, but we don't glare at it. Right? We think about it. We understand we had these problems. And it goes on to say, once we have taken a step withholding nothing, we are delighted. Once we bring it out into the sunlight and say, hey, look, I used to tell 10 people I had this problem. They look at me, and if they were honest, they say, Bob, why are you worried about that? Why is it upsetting you? Because I had to do with my thinking in my mind. We could look the world in the eye. So we were out of self-centered fear. We didn't care at this point. We didn't have the pride. We had humility. Isn't it interesting? Getting this program, getting humility, is a way to strength. They say that here. Spirituality is God consciousness. People think it. They say, oh, he had to go believe in a higher power because he was a weak person. No, it brings us the strength in life and everything, comes to us through that strength in the higher consciousness. So it says here, we can be alone at perfect peace and ease. You see that? Perfect peace and ease, it's telling us here. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now begin to have a spiritual experience. So there we go. What more do you need? And it talks about here about being cast out. Again, in the 5th step, it says these defects of character cast out. And then we go into, I'm going right through these steps here. Most of you have been through this already, but bring it into your heart and have this full understanding, not through the brain. The longest distance is between the brain and the heart. But it says on page 76, it's talking here about humility. We're talking about the principle of steps. 6 says willingness, and 7 is humility. Oh, let me go back to step 5. Step 5 was the integrity. That's the principle of that step, to be honest and to tell somebody honestly, when you admit your faults. And step 4 was the courage to do this program. But anyway, so humility, willingness is step 6. Willingness is so important. Like I said, if I'm upset during the day, or to be honest, and I say to myself, look, I'm angry now, I'm upset. I have this addiction, to food. I have hunger. Hey, hunger's a good one to talk about. It's not about, we have spirituality, spiritual bread. I talked about this in the last meeting. So to be willing to understand that there is another way, to be honest with ourselves, the willingness to say to myself, no matter how upset and depressed I am, no matter how hungry I am, or how this addiction's taking over me, the answer is that it's not true. It's not true. It says in the doctor's opinion, knowing the truth from the false. And and it says there, if a better code of morals and we agnostics, philosophy of life would help us. No, just this willingness to understand that there's an answer out there, and it has to do with this higher consciousness, higher power. But so we go from willingness, and in step 7, actually step 6 and 7 are just 2 paragraphs on the top of page 76. But we do have the 7th step prayer. Of course, step 7 says humility, humbly asking him to remove our shortcomings. So pride means we can figure it all out, being in the self. We can figure it out through these diets and all this thing with the food. We can. It fails every time. 95% of it fails. The 5% of you who have been able to stay on a food or any kind of off program of dealing with your problems in life, you're just miserable. But here it talks about a better way. The better way is the letting go, letting God, right? Surrendering, losing the whole self. Just getting out of self. So we'll read that. The 76, my creator, in the second paragraph, I am willing that you have all of me. That's humility. Bowing. Why in a lot of religions they bow down or go on their knees when they pray? And in our thing, the third step prayer, a lot of people say it on their knees. It's humility. Getting out of the self. The self is like, I always use the word, we have the bedevilments on page 52. It has the word devil in it. Those are the lower, look, people are trying to figure out their life. They say, I want to figure out my anger. I want to figure out why I got angry. No, to me, it's like a hot coal. I just want to cast it out because it has to do with the crazy thinking. How can you figure something out again? How can I figure something out when my crazy brain put me here? But we have two sides, spiritual side. Again, I say nobody can teach you anything that you don't already know. The answer is always inside of us. People say, I want to ask my sponsor, I'm going to ask 10 people what to do. We have the answer. And when we're quiet and still, God will give us the answer to our problems. And I say in my life, one of the biggest answers is that it really doesn't matter. 95% of the time, God will say to me, or my center will say, Bob, what do you care what I care what a person looked at me the wrong way or what they had to say to me or somebody at work? When you're out of the self, then you're free. The same with the addictions. It all has to relate it to our addictions. Bill says, and it says like 3 or 4 times in his book, the answer to all our problems. Of course, our problems are related to the self. Selfishness, self-centeredness. That's with the food addiction. That's with every addiction. And always a lot of time I go back to the food. It has to do with the self. You can't blame us on the TV and the internet, and you go down the highway, they tell you the answer. That if you really want, and then we use our 5 senses, the taste, the smell, and the hearing. It's like the food is like a siren calling to us. And these addictions for wealth, for money, all of these things. But we try to resist it. You can't do it by resisting it. I'm going to go back to the food for a minute because these diets don't work. And you know that because you're trying to resist it. You need that change of thinking. And I'll bring it up right now with the clarity, with water, the clarity, or God's given food. I have here an apple, right? I'll bring this up at every meeting because 75% of our country, well, here in the United States and around the world probably, they have this problem. And more people, they talk about people, dying or getting sick from alcoholism and drug addiction. It's really, really bad. A lot of people do, but you can't compare it. And I talk about the diseases here too, the heart disease and everything. But we can't fight it. We just can't fight it. We can't. We can. It tells us here. This is why this wisdom in these steps gives you the answer to all your problems. I can't fight the food. I can't fight my boss at work. And after a while, as step 10 promises say, we know the truth from the false. We stop fighting anyone or anything. By this point, sanity has returned. We've not even sworn it off. Diets are swearing it off. You can't, it just doesn't work. You know why? Because somebody goes on a diet and then all of a sudden they get to their goal weight and then say, oh, that's not so great after all. It's like, so what, I'm there. And then they say, well, the food's more important because they didn't change their perception.